blockchain not crypto narrative has weakened significantly to the point that maybe this is the cycle where it's like no one's even talking about blockchain not crypto, and it's just crypto coins, it's just cyber coins. But I feel like that is the dominant narrative. Like we used to get emails from the Ethereum Foundation saying, why aren't you covering us? And we would say, well, of course you're like a weird scam coin. Like we're not going to cover this weird thing called Ethereum, right? It's not even launched yet.
Welcome to Beyond the Beat, a podcast by Chain Story, the agency to elevate your status in crypto. I'm your host, Pedro, and every week we'll be talking to the people in crypto media. We'll be telling their stories, their failures, their lessons, and whatever tips or tricks they've got up their sleeves.
Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of Beyond the Beat. Finally, after months of trying and pestering him, I finally got him on. Joon from Cryptographic Media. Thanks heaps for coming on.
Hey, Pedro, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, glad to be here. Glad we could make it work.
I've been lately trying out a different intro into the conversations. And rather than ask a question, I guess this technically is a question, but what's been like front of mind for you lately when you've been thinking about just general crypto? Maybe it could be the media. You were just at DevCon, so something along there might be like, bubbling up repetitively in your mind. But yeah, what's been sort of on the table for you lately?
Yeah, I mean, I think a few things. I think, sort of the macro environment has been really interesting of late, obviously with, the Trump, sort of the imminent Trump presidency, what all of that means for crypto. And then you have a lot of geopolitical and sort of macro stuff happening at the same time. So I think all of that is super interesting in terms of like where crypto goes in the next, 12, 24 months. So I think a lot of macro stuff, really.
When you say macro stuff, like what specifically are you looking at? Do you look at like what specific countries are doing, what companies, or do you take it from like more a markets perspective, like Europe is doing this and in that direction, and then you have Latin America or Southeast Asia?
Yeah, and I'm by no means a macro expert, but just the kind of like I guess the interplay of like the geopolitics and economics, right? So like, for example, what do tariffs mean for, economies like China? And if, China slows down, right? They're already not doing great. If China slows down, what does that mean for the rest of the world? I'm talking to you from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I was born in Malaysia and spent the first 12 years of my life here. Places like Malaysia could be very big beneficiaries of this uh, trade war situation because many manufacturers, both from China and the U.S., are sort of nearshoring to places like Malaysia, so that they manufacture in Malaysia, and then you can get around some of the tariffs. That's one scenario, right? But it could also go the other way. So that's kind of what I mean by, there's a lot of like interesting macro stuff going on.
And what's like how does crypto look or in Malaysia? Because Malaysia is definitely one of the fewer countries that like one of the smaller countries that people think about when they look to that region. Like somebody might look at Singapore or Hong Kong or Vietnam. What's going on in Malaysia? I'm interested.
Yeah, and I've been spending more time in KL in Malaysia this year. So I've been getting to know the scene a little bit better. Previously, I was in mainly in London for the last I want to say 13 years or so. And that's where I first joined CoinDesk back in 2013, but I'm sure we'll get to that later. So Malaysia and Southeast Asia, I think, has been top of mind for me, both for the macro reasons I mentioned, right? It's becoming more important. Whereas in the past, China was where all the action was, right? All the manufacturing, everything was gravitating around China. But because of the new trade situation, countries, middleweight countries like Malaysia, larger ones like Indonesia, Vietnam, and then smaller ones like Singapore all have their roles to play in terms of whether it's manufacturing, financial services, and so on. So Southeast Asia is I think growing in prominence and influence. And in terms of crypto, I'm actually trying to start a column about this for CoinDesk, which is a little bit overdue. So my apologies to Ben Schiller. But yeah, in terms of crypto, there's like several interesting things, right? It's a big market, so there's a lot of retail, there's a lot of consumers here, people who want to buy coins and trade coins. But it's also a big producer of companies. So like Malaysia, for example, has several very large and influential crypto companies that are all homegrown. Malaysian founders, largely Malaysian employees, some of them with zero venture backing of any kind. So like CoinGecko is an example of that, fully bootstrapped, all in Malaysia. Their office is actually a stone's throw from where I'm sitting here, talking to you here. Jupiter, the Solana aggregator, is another one. Big Malaysia team. The CTO, Siong's Malaysian, but also increasingly a big Singapore presence. Who else? Etherscan is also Malaysian. I think they only did one round of funding and they've grown the whole company from Malaysia. Virtuals, which is popping off right now in terms of market price. They let you roll your own AI agents. Also, a Malaysian team pivoted from another project called PathDAO a couple of years ago. So the number of producers, builders, startups, and companies and projects in Malaysia is actually quite high as well.
And why do you think then that it fall? Because I had no idea, and I try to consider myself a reasonably informed individual. But why do you think Malaysia sort of gets thrown under the rug and or overlooked? I guess is probably the right word.
Yeah, I think Malaysia is a classic, it's a sort of a middleweight country, right? Population, I think it's 30 something million now. I haven't checked, but it should be in that region, versus, a place like, Indonesia with, I think, something like 120 million, right? It's not the biggest market, right? It's not the richest market. It's not a place like Singapore with very high per capita GDP, and overweight on things like financial services. So it's kind of in the middle ground. That's one reason. But I think the other reason is that Malaysians are just extremely, extremely adaptable. And that makes them a little bit odorless. They're very good at blending in to different scenarios. Malaysia is a very multilingual, multicultural society. You could meet a Malaysian person in China, you wouldn't know they're from China necessarily. You can meet somebody in America, you wouldn't know they were from Malaysia. So I think that adaptability means that a lot of Malaysian projects always start with a global mindset to begin with, and that's why you don't really notice that they are Malaysian projects.
Interesting. Yeah. What do you think about like the whole Asian region? Because like I'm in Latin America. Well, I'm from Chile, but I'm based in Buenos Aires at the moment, and I feel like Buenos Aires and Argentina is one of the most under-talked stories that's happening in crypto right now, just because like special economic zone is potentially underway. Like Milei, not himself has been explicitly pro crypto, but he's very pro innovation, private sector, tech, that sort of stuff. And so there is a lot of projects that are happening. Um, and well, Brazil has like this massive institutional footprint and all these sort of stuff is just like bubbling up. But it doesn't get covered that much, or like you don't have that much of yeah like it's an idea, it's like this, oh, things are happening in Latin America and it's the future, but it's never really the present. And I think that same thing happens with the Asian or like Southeast Asian region.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's more like like how in finance there's like market structure, right? Like what's the market structure of like, I don't know, the bond, the US Treasury market. And I think there's something similar happening that happens in journalism, and a lot of that is underpinned by your medium, right? Your language, right? So if we're operating in English language media, we are, we're going to be underweight on looking at things that are happening in Latin America, for example, which is not mainly English speaking. Or we're going to be underweight looking at things that are happening in China or mainland China, right, which is not English speaking. And then sort of the same thing goes for Southeast Asia. And I think the problem in Southeast Asia is actually compounded because it's a region. It's not a it's kind of not a real region, right? Like the term like Southeast Asia was invented by the American military during the Vietnam War. Uh, Although there is a very ancient history of the region that dates back, to ancient times. But Southeast Asia, the modern conception of it is, something like, I don't know, 50 years, 60 years old or something. And so the problem for Southeast Asia is that it's even more fragmented, right? You have all these disparate nations, they all speak different languages. There's a lot of us here in this region, and there isn't really a unified medium, right, necessarily, that connects all of these people. So a little bit similar to the EU or Europe. So I think for those reasons, you just don't have the market mass to
Mm.
matter, right? You don't matter enough to like English language media. Um, and if you don't have your own media ecosystem, then you can't even talk amongst yourselves, right? So I think that is the problem.
Is there like I mean, I'm sure there is, but what about like, yeah, Asian media ecosystems and like their
It's very
presence?
language based. It's very language
Hmm.
based, right? So like Japan will have their own media ecosystem. Like Korea has their own, well-funded media, newspapers and magazines. Mainland China has it. But in terms of Asia, there is no Asian media ecosystem, right? Because the concerns of people in Japan are very different from the concerns of people in, say, Malaysia. Just the same way there isn't a European, newspaper. So I think it's a bit of a problem of fragmentation. And I think even if you look at the United States, it was like that for a long time, right? You had very powerful regional newspapers in different cities, and one or two national titles. But a lot of people would read their regional newspaper, right? The Sacramento Bee or whatever it is, before they would pick up the New York Times. And I think that has only changed in, let's say maybe since the 90s or something like that, basically since the advent of the internet. And that's why like owning newspaper chains was such a great business. And Warren Buffett loved to own newspaper companies because they had a monopoly on each of those regional markets.
Do you think the internet has done better or worse for the media, for media? Like it's been a better
Um, I think it's
playground or
undeniably been
technology?
worse for media businesses. Yeah. Maybe good for media as a whole, but a lot of media businesses have not done great.
And do you think that the internet, like the sort of a knife that causes the wound, do you think it also has the ability to be part of the solution, or it's created this sort of cascading effect where it's just destroying media left, right, and center, and it's creating like individual or smaller or niche sort of communities and their own ecosystems, and not this like overarching or like media conglomerates like we knew of them before?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember who said it. It might have been like a Navalism or something. But like someone was, some VC philosopher king was like, internet businesses or like, software businesses are just consist of like two phases, right? There's either there's either bundling or unbundling. And I think we already went through an unbundling, right? Like all the newspapers and the cable networks and all of those and everything, even cinema movie studios were all unbundled and all that value was captured by Google, Facebook, right, basically maybe a bit of TikTok, and that's represented by advertising dollars shifting, and that's so we already have huge media conglomerates. They're just called Google and Facebook, and they don't care about producing any of their own content, and so now we have to wait for a phase where those guys get unbundled, and to some extent they are, but even popular creators today, they work for Google and Facebook, right? They like that's how they distribute their content. So I think, yeah, that unbundling phase isn't quite here yet. And we're just, we're, yeah, the new media conglomerates are Google and Facebook, and they don't care about the old, they don't care about the old media producers.
Speaking of media conglomerates, like you were there, or you were part of CoinDesk more than 11 years ago now. I'm not sure the exact date that you joined. And I suppose CoinDesk is like a media conglomerate in the maybe not traditional sense of the word, but in crypto at least. It's probably the most read. It's probably got the biggest team. It's probably got the biggest reach. Um, what was it like back when it first began? And did did you guys ever think it would become what it's become today?
Yeah, I think the answer is definitely not. But at the start, you have to remember, and this part of the CoinDesk story is not well told and not well remembered. CoinDesk started as a startup in London, and I think it was started around in early 2013. I joined in the tail end of 2013, and that year Bitcoin did its first big mainstream price run up. So I think it went from 100 to 1200 was the peak. And mainstream media and sort of newspapers and so on, the BBC was starting to pay attention, right? This weird thing called Bitcoin is happening, and there's people transacting with it, and it's peer to peer. And at the time, the dominant narrative was this was the province of like crypto anarchists, right? So people like Amir Taki and Vitalik even were living in squats all around Europe and London, and journalists would love to go and visit them in the squat and just be like, "What are these people doing? Oh my God, they're hackers, and they're mining Bitcoin, and they're writing code for Bitcoin." So that was kind of the vibe in 2013. It was like this fringe techno crypto anarchist movement has arrived, and it's kind of weird and funny, and let's take photos and write a few fun pieces. Um, and so that was the mainstream impression. But so the founder of CoinDesk is a gentleman named Shakil Khan, who most people know as Shaq. And he's a very well-known technology investor in London. At the time, he had just left Spotify. He had helped to take Spotify global and really grew that business. He was the head of special projects. So he was sort of well connected with the Silicon Valley and the tech crowd. And so in parallel to this crypto anarchist narrative, you also had the Silicon Valley people who were all getting very interested in Bitcoin. And Dan Morehead, for example, was starting Pantera around this time. Coinbase was getting started at this time. A lot of those early companies getting started. So there was this Silicon Valley undercurrent of like, hey, this Bitcoin thing is super interesting. We should be playing around with it, and we need to learn more about it. And the way Shaq tells the story is because he had invested early in BitPay, which was an early Bitcoin payments processor. I think they had raised more money than Coinbase at that time, so they were like they were the big startup in the space. And the way he tells it, I think, is he kept getting pings from people saying, "Hey, explain this Bitcoin thing to me. You invested in this company." And so he got so many of them that year that he was like, "You know what? Let's just set up a website so I can just tell people to go to this website and read about Bitcoin, and so they won't keep asking me to write them emails." And so that was really the genesis of CoinDesk. And he had got a few folks he had worked with before to get the ball rolling. And so that outfit was, I think we were like 5 or 6 people in total, with a few freelancers in the US. You may know of a gentleman named Pete Rizzo, who was a freelancer as well as Ryan Selkis was a freelancer for us back then. And so
Interesting.
it was
I did not
it
know
was a
that.
ragtag bunch. But it was fairly well funded even from the start because Shaq was able to raise from a lot of people he knew, and obviously he had resources, he had an office, he had a spare office, and so on. So it was ragtag, but not in that classic, like ramen, startup ramen kind of way, right? There was still resource, there was still a plan, there was still sort of, some momentum going. So yeah, that's what it was like back then.
And why did you join in? Like when you either got the offer or offered yourself like to join this ragtag team of like crypto journalists to cover what was going on? What were those initial thoughts and why did you decide to take the jump?
Yeah, so funnily enough, I had actually met Shaq several years before when I was living in Shanghai, and I was a journalist in Shanghai, and I was involved in a mailing list there called Shanghai Webloggers, and it was for, geeky people who are exploring this thing called weblogging back then. This is like 2005 or six. So it's literally an email mailing list, and one day Shaq sends a message to the mailing list saying, I've just moved to Shanghai and I want to meet everyone on this list. And he's a very charismatic character. So if you've ever met him, you'd know that upon if he says he wants to meet everyone on the list, like he really means it. Um, and so yeah, we had met in Shanghai randomly back then. I had then, fast forward several years later, gone to London, and remember those Bitcoin stories I was telling you about? They were trickling out. A lot of them were quoting this thing called CoinDesk because they were the only people who knew what the hell was going on. And so I went to CoinDesk.com and I saw, holy shit, it started by this guy Shaq who I met years ago in Shanghai. And so that was kind of the circuitous route. In addition, it's a story about immigration. So I had finished my master's degree in London, and I wanted to stay on, and so I needed a job that would sponsor a visa for me, basically. And so CoinDesk was one of those places that I tried to hit up and try to get myself hired.
What did you that yeah, what did you think about Bitcoin back in those early days? Like, did it immediately click, or was it something that you started to uncover as you started reporting for?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always found it super interesting and cool and fascinating, and I was always interested in that peer-to-peer aspect of it, because I think it harkened back to so many of those, sort of techno-utopian ideas of, the early internet and things like that. We want, freedom and so on. Um, and so I always thought it was fascinating in and of itself, right? And it was having all of these effects where like you had people selling burgers for Bitcoin. You had, all these mining farms. There were rumors of like there was a big Bitcoin miner in Shoreditch, which is like a hipster part of central London, in a warehouse, and you had these, crypto anarchists, running open source code from their squad, right? So all of those aspects of it made it a very, very interesting story. Like there was a lot of like ripple effects of this technology. Like it wasn't just, people meeting in boardrooms, signing agreements, and deploying a software as a service thing, right? And I think there was also this sense of excitement that was very grassroots, right? This wasn't like someone at Google spinning off a startup, right, to do some middleware. This was like just random people popping up all over the place, contributing software, buying Bitcoin, contributing liquidity, just doing a lot of random stuff. And I think that whole mix meant that it was definitely a story to follow. Um, and although I wouldn't say I was a true believer, right? Like, I was a journalist. I wasn't you know, an activist for Bitcoin, right? I wasn't going out trying to tell everyone, hey, download, buy Bitcoin, download a Bitcoin wallet. So it was always at a bit of a distance.
Have you have you like gone around to that idea? Are you less of a skeptic now or more of a skeptic now? Especially considering like must have been crazy to look at it back then at like that cypherpunk activist, like probably hanging out with Amir Taki and like those early day like canonical figures. And then fast forward to today, and it's like Larry Fink is everywhere, and Pomp is wearing his suit, and like things have just completely changed. Like, yeah, do you think it's sort of lost its way?
Um, I don't know if it's lost its way. I think it's gotten bigger. My personal view is I'm a bit of a mid-curver, like the mid-curve meme. I'm kind of a mid-curve. I'm the ultimate mid-curve guy. I'm still like, with all my but this, and everyone
Yeah.
else is just like buy Bitcoin, buy Bitcoin. So I think I'm
I
still
think everybody in
somewhat.
the ACJR sees you're constantly like, hey, but what about this? I feel like you're like raising your finger, just like, what about this?
So, I mean, I think I'm still critical, although, I think it's been many years, right? Like, I don't think it's going away. I think that the technology has proven itself, like Bitcoin has never gone down. I think, like, clearly there's product market fit. Like people want this technology, they want to do stuff with it, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or Solana or other stuff. So I think on that front, I'm more convinced, right? Like it's not a Beanie Baby kind of flash in the pan. It's something that's here to stay.
Are you, in that sense, then, are you happy with the state of things now? Because, like, you've lived through a bunch of different cycles and you've lived through a bunch of different narratives. And I mean, in 2013 was when the Cyprus crisis happened. And I think that was like on a lot of people's minds. And then, like, yeah, then 2017 sort of cycle hit, first time to 20K. I guess you were just after MTGOX or just as MTGOX was like falling apart. Um, and then, yeah, is there any specific, I guess an interesting question that pops up now. Is there any specific situation or event that happened that sticks with you? Like anything that maybe something massive or something that you look back and you're like, oh yeah, that was like a wow or an oh my God moment for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think lots of moments like that, sort of in hindsight, thinking back. But in terms of how the narrative has evolved, I think it's kind of interesting. I think in some ways it hasn't evolved at all, It's like there was the super early phase where it's like this is a weird technology and we're going to take videos of these crypto anarchists, right? Like after that, we quickly got into like the 2013 to 15 was quickly into Bitcoin, not blockchain, not Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin, right? We got into that, right? Pretty quickly. Um, and I feel like we've been on the same track ever since. Like there are still these two things of like there's crypto and then there's blockchain, not crypto. Um, Although I think most recently, I think the blockchain, not crypto narrative has weakened significantly to the point that maybe this is the cycle where it's like no one's even talking about blockchain, not crypto, and it's just crypto coins, it's just cyber coins. But I feel like that is the dominant narrative and has been for the last sort of 10 years of the industry.
Where do you stand on the meme coin narrative? Because like that's taken over, and that's like nihilism to the extreme, and like no fucks given. And like I don't know,
Yeah,
I was
yeah, yeah, yeah.
chatting to Ryan Gladwin, who was like 55,000 new tokens coming out, and you had like the whole live stream madness and them taking it down. Yeah, what's your point of view there?
Um, I guess I don't really have one. Like in a way, it's not. In a way, it's shocking but not surprising, right? It's just kind of like, yeah, yeah, people are gonna make ways to like mint new tokens more quickly and find ways to pump them and dump them. So I mean, like, even back in the day, we had lots of altcoins, right? Like I remember there was this thing called Feathercoin. Feathercoin for some reason used to get a lot of press coverage because they seemed kind of legit, right? And of course we had like Litecoin. We've been dealing with this whole issue of like what's a legit coin, us as journalists, right, in the media. Like since this whole thing started, right? Like we used to get emails from the Ethereum Foundation saying, "Why aren't you covering us?" And we would say, "Well, of course you're like a weird scam coin. Like we're not going to cover this weird thing called Ethereum, right? It's not even launched yet. You're just saying it's going to launch, and so like I think that's like the fundamental problem in crypto media is a guy comes to you and says, "Hey, write about my super coin," and your job as a journalist is to be like, figure out whether to write about it or not and how real it is.
What were you? That's hilarious that the Ethereum Foundation would reach out and be like, "Hey, can you please write about us?" And you're like, "But I don't even know who you are." And was that your initial thought as well when they first reached out and you're like, Ethereum, I mean, what makes you different than Namecoin
Oh
or
yeah.
everything else that came from
Yeah.
before you?
Oh, totally, totally. Yeah. And of course, it sounds like incredibly stupid today. But I mean, in the context of the time, it was like it was another email from another like weird sounding project, right? And I still remember because I put together the first consensus conference, and we had a hackathon, and part of the hackathon was we had imagine back then you could do this. We had preloaded copies of the Bitcoin blockchain so people could hack on it and do stuff, and a big contingent from Consensus with a Y, which had, I think, just gone rolling, joined the hackathon, and they were kicking up a big fuss because they're like, why are we only hacking on Bitcoin? We should be hacking on Ethereum. And they were handing out copies of the Ethereum blockchain on their, on thumb drives. And so it was, yeah, it's kind of the same problem of like, you can be your job is to be critical, but then and you just keep doing it for every project, right? Like you have to keep evaluating the claims of every single project.
Where did you? I'm intrigued by where you. What was your experience during the Bitcoin block size war? So I've done a bit of studying on it, and like I've read the Block Size War by Jonathan Beer, and I've chatted to some people, and it's always like it's a fascinating moment. It feels like it was an inflection. Well, it was an inflection point. Like there wasn't before and after, but in crypto media, or there's a lot of newcomers that are from like the 2021 era that have never heard of the Bitcoin block size war, that have no idea that that existed, and that yeah couldn't fathom maybe the idea of like this shadowy group of corporate people and miners and companies getting together and like thinking about like how this is going to let's increase the block size, let's not. And then you had like node runners, and then you had Gavin Andreessen jumping in there and giving his point of view. What was that experience like for you, especially from like a journalist perspective? You were probably on the ground for a bunch of these things and like reporting on it or looking into it from a different, not necessarily a vested interest, but just like, all right, let's figure out what the hell is going on here.
Yeah, I think probably my most sort of vivid memory of that is again the first consensus, which was in September of 2015 in New York City, and one of the first panels we'd put together was something that you'll never see again, right? So we had Greg Maxwell, G Maxwell, who was a small block proponent and had almost never spoken in public anywhere at that point, I believe. There, we had Mike Hearn, who had just rage quit Bitcoin, and he was the guy who worked at Google in Switzerland, who had brought a lot of legitimacy to the project when he started contributing. And he was on this big screen. I think it was Skype back. He was Skyping in, and we also had Emin Gunsirer, who was the moderator, and we picked him because he was like a professor, right? Like, these are like very high IQ people. We need a professor to like moderate. And he had insisted on bringing along this young fellow named Vitalik Buterin as well, who at the time was also very involved in the block size debate on the forums. And we also had Adam Ludwin, who I don't know if he's still in crypto today, but back then he was doing a company called Chain that had raised a lot of VC funding, and he was kind of trying to mainstream a lot of this technology. So anyway, all these people, were kind of having the debate, and this was the early days. This was before it really got crazy. And already there was a lot of tension. It was kind of a little bit political or a little bit difficult to put together to get all those parties to agree to be on stage together. And so if you Google it, you'll see some of these photos where, you have Vitalik and Mike Hearn and Greg Maxwell on stage together in a kind of in today's context, you'll be like, why would these people ever be, in the same room together with Emin Gunsirer as well? But a lot of the, and here's the letdown part, a lot of the meat of the block size wars, I was not at CoinDesk. I had left CoinDesk at that point and gone to Quartz, where I was covering, fun stuff like the development of GDPR. So I missed a lot of the really in the weeds block size war stuff. Although I covered a bit of it at Quartz, but I couldn't go as deep because the Quartz audience wasn't quite as invested, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. I guess yeah, it felt like a wild time, and it felt like something that just like yeah, should get talked about more, especially like right now that there is a lot more discussion, not necessarily about the block size, but just like about just the whole BIP process and just the like the Bitcoin blockchain. Is it more than money, and is it like this storage base, and what is it going to become of it? And I feel like there's small popping ups of conversations that probably took place back then to a different degree, but that are starting to happen. And it'd be interesting to sort of not necessarily revive them, but just to look back on history and what happened and, yeah, how the different players thought about this stuff and where we are now. Um,
I think it was even
and
back then, it was tremendously opaque though. So I think it was, and we didn't have, I think like crypto media and so on wasn't as well developed or as well resourced. So I think it was, yeah, it was hard when contemporaneously, if you think about it, it was hard to figure out what was going on. And that's why I think like a book looking back puts together the arc of events well. But I don't think I think very few, of course, the people who are like deeply involved had a picture of what was going on and an opinion of what's going on. But I think it was for most, I think, Bitcoin holders or even professional watchers like journalists, it was quite difficult to really know what was transpiring at any one time.
is a journalist a professional watcher? I never
Yeah,
thought about it that
basically,
way.
I think so. Yeah, you show up and you see what's going on.
do you do you think we're doing a good job as professional watchers at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think we could, of course, and I think the odds are very stacked against crypto media in this sense because the projects or the subjects have so much at stake financially and also so much financial resource. There is really in their interest to shill you their coin, right? And get you to write about their coin. And again, like your job is to like, well, figure out, should I write about the coin? Is it a real coin? And so, and I think it's very, very asymmetrical in crypto, maybe more so than, almost any other industry. And so I think to begin with, crypto journalists and crypto media have a tough job. I think they're doing fine. Although I think interestingly now you see some trad media are doing well, not by reporting on the crypto side, but more on the policy, politics, and the Trump beat, where they're getting a lot of, good stories. And the same goes for like the TradFi beat, where people who are well sourced at like, BlackRock or something are able to get great stories. So yeah, I think crypto media is doing good job, good enough job, but it's getting squeezed right on both ends, I think.
Where do you land on the PR side of things? Because like PR is a huge. I mean, I say this with the bias that I've only been a journalism, like a formal journalist in the crypto scene, so I don't know how PRs in other industries operate or work, but it feels like in crypto they're a huge part of the media scene, and that also adds to that sort of I guess confusion or like, okay, how much should I write about this specific project because I've got these PR people hounding me on the side, and like sometimes you just need to get clicks out there, and so it's a very click driven like traffic. Um, but yeah, and I guess I say this also knowing like we're both in the ACJR, and so the ACJR is very like populated by PR people sometimes I think cozying up to journalists, not always, like shout out to those PR people that do a really good job, but sometimes I do think that they're sort of cozying up and trying to figure out, okay, how can I land my story in the media, you know? And so they jump on there. But yeah, I'm curious to see how also, I guess, how it's evolved the PR presence, if now there's more, if now there's less, and if there is a specific like place for them at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think, specifically on the crypto side, when I was a reporter at CoinDesk, and that's really 2013 to 2015, um, there was very little PR, honestly. Not much, hardly any. Like teams had no comms people. You just, Skype with the founder. Like one of my best sources was a guy named Arthur Hayes. I would Skype with him all the time. And the reason why I used him was because he was an ex-Citibank guy, right? And like, if the Bitcoin price went up or down, I would just message him like, why did it go up? Say, oh, Cyprus. Oh, okay, Cyprus. you know. And so um, so I think and I don't have a full picture of like sort of the PR industrial complex today in crypto media, but I did get a sort of a rude awakening when I moved over to Quartz in 2015, and I was the European tech correspondent for them. And day one of opening my email had 300 emails, right? All pitches from PR. Next they had 500, right? Next they had 600, and this didn't stop, right? This just went on for like 3 or 4 years, and so I got a bit of an introduction to that. I think the difference in crypto is like the urgency, and I'm kind of guessing here. I think it's the urgency of the pitch, where like because it's so tied to like the markets, right? It's so instant, it's so reactive. I think the PRs and the clients are a little bit more um, committed to trying to get a result, versus like Facebook sending a press release saying, hey, version XYZ is up, and or this feature is rolled out. It's not super, there's nothing like super pressing about it, super time
Mhm.
sensitive about it. So I think maybe that's a difference. I think like general tech PR is a bit more genteel, it's a bit slower paced. It's more like, hey, come and have some drinks and get to know us, and we'll show you all our new features, right? Or do you want to do a soft focus profile of our founder? Whereas I feel like crypto PR is a bit more like, the airdrop is coming like tomorrow. You have to write about it like right now. Like, it's this kind of more manic vibe. So yeah, again, I say like I think the crypto journalists really have the odds stacked against them in this regard.
Yeah, nah, for sure. It's something that I think about, and I feel like now at DL, it's a bit different. We don't like capture that many PR pitches. Like I remember when I was at Decrypt or the Defiant, it was maddening and madness at all times. Um, you're you're the founder of Cryptographic Media, and I was having a little hound around uh, your website, and it something that caught my eye was that you're super interested in no code tools, and that you think that publishers and journalists can really benefit from using no code automation flows and things like that. Can you expand on that? I was like drawn into it, and I know that I messaged you and I was like, hey, this is something that like I've been thinking about, and that I know that I should be working with a little bit more. But yeah, why do you say that, and like what's the general thought process there?
Yeah, so I guess, to start with, like cryptographic media is just like my personal vehicle. Like I have no employees. It's basically just me. But it's an entity that I do all of my contracting work out of. But um, I think to begin with, I'm a bit of a productivity geek, right? I've been following like, productivity stuff for many, many years. I've tried lots of systems. I used to be a big devotee of getting things done, if you've ever heard of that. It's called GTD. You may be interested. Search for Getting Things Done. David Allen, he's the guy who wrote the book. It's a whole system for like how to get things done. And from that, it got me interested. Like, I used to have old early smartphones and whatnot, and try and do my own kind of automation, simple automations and scripts. so that I could digitize this getting things done workflow. And that led me down eventually when I had to, when I came back to CoinDesk. So I left CoinDesk, I went to Quartz, came back to CoinDesk to help them rebuild their event business. Um, I had to do the first consensus when I came back. That was the 2019 one. And I just got hit by this deluge of like inbounds. We used to get we get thousands of submissions from people who want to speak. All of those people, have PR agents, CMOs, PAs, people following up to find out if they are indeed going to speak. So it's just thousands and thousands of inbounds of people who won't take no for an answer, basically. They want to speak, right? And even if you could deal with all those inbounds, you then had to start telling these people stuff in an organized way, like, hey, you're going to speak on Tuesday at 1 p.m. or you're going to speak on Wednesday at 7, 8, like whatever it is, right? You have to organize all this information, and you have to do it in such a way that you could track what you've said to each of these thousands of people, which is not the easiest thing. When you open your email and you search for their name and you see 20 threads, right? Like, where did we leave this? And so it was really this organizing consensus that led me down to like, look, I really need to figure out a way to like be much more efficient with organizing all of this. The way it was done previously was like on a spreadsheet, right? Meaning there's no automation. It's like writing on a piece of paper. And so it got so crazy. I looked through all the different solutions at the time and ended up with Airtable, but was hopeless at it. I hired a consultant to help me develop the uh, first bits of automation, and just basically kept going at it. And today we use Airtable to produce conferences. We produce I don't know, 10 or 15 large conferences a year, and we use the same Airtable system for all of them. So it's templated, it's systematized, it's been battle tested through, you know, events with tens of thousands of attendees. And it really enables us to do this stuff in a very lightweight way, right? And the way what it pertains to journalists is, I think journalists are facing the same problems, but in a micro scale, like every day, right? Basically, journalists are always in this like information overload, too many inbounds situation. But the crazy thing to me is journalists never seem to have a system to organize any of that. It's all just like, I see an email, I'm going to respond to it. Like someone DMs me, I'll respond to it. There's like no system whatsoever. And so just imagine the amount of efficiency or value you would capture if there was a system. Well, any system, first of all. And then secondly, if the system was easy to edit, right? You don't have to go and learn JavaScript. You can just do it on a visual editor and automate it, which will give you even more efficiencies. So that's why I think journalists on a personal level can probably benefit from this. And then if you roll that out on an organization or, maybe per desk or something, you'll get even more efficiencies because, how do editors work? They just write everything down in a spreadsheet as well, and a spreadsheet is
Yeah.
just like a piece of paper, right? So like you're getting almost no like efficiency gains like from those tools.
So, and is there any, well, I guess you have no idea really of news desks that use these type of tools that might be getting ahead of the game or that could be getting ahead of the game? Because,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not sure. I think maybe Bitcoin Magazine uses some Airtable stuff. They do for their conference. I'm not sure about the newsroom. And then I think CoinDesk also uh, was turned on to Airtable years ago partly through my efforts. And I think there's a bit of usage on the newsroom, but again, not entirely sure. And journalists are quite stubborn when it comes to tech and workflows, I think.
I want to ask one more question before we dive into the book recommendations and like that sort of stuff towards the end. And it's the idea of conferences and events because like there's the whole conference circuit and there's people who like live on conferences and go to a bunch of events. And I know that you're heavily involved in a bunch of different conferences that happen. Like you started up the first consensus, and then now you're heavily involved in DevCon and all this sort of stuff, and I'm interested in getting like how important are conferences for, I guess, the general well-being of the industry is the way I'm going to go. I know that sounds vague, and I know it depends obviously on the, like if you're a journalist or if you're just like a conference goer, like an enjoyer, or if you're like a big company or a builder. Um, but yeah, like how important are they? And do we sometimes like um, there's a word that I'm looking for that's not coming to me right now, but do we like are there too many conferences?
Yeah. So, I started a consensus back in 2015, really through um, just happenstance. Basically, CoinDesk was running out of money at the time, and we needed a bit more money to extend our runway. This is when Bitcoin fell from 1,200 to 200. So, we were like, well, we're cooked. Like, the main exchange just vaporized. Like the price of the asset is cratered. Like Ross Ulbricht was sent to jail for 2 life sentences. Like this whole industry is done, right? And so CoinDesk was struggling. A conference is a way to make a decent amount of money. What I think maybe the only way to make a decent amount of money while we figured out what to do. And ultimately, we sold the business to Barry Silbert at DCG after the conference did very well. But so I kind of got into it by happenstance. I never set out to be a conference, producer. I had again coincidentally built a conference business in Singapore a few years before that had focused on the tech startup scene in Singapore, which is why I did the consensus one. Um, and then I went back to journalism, and it was really CoinDesk that brought me back to try and redo their conference business. So it's not like I'm not a huge I don't have a ton of like experience in events and conferences in general. Like I'm really my background is journalism, and that's why I think conferences are a great medium to do the same kind of journalistic work, right? At CoinDesk in my day at least, we always thought about the conversations on stage as basically the same thing as what happens when a reporter talks to a source on a phone call, right? You're interviewing a person and you're trying to bring to light some new interesting fact, insight, or something else about this company or this trend. So I always approach it from a very journalistic lens. Of course, today I have an agency. We work with clients. It's a bit of a different canvas, right? Like clients are paying you to produce their conference, right? And so you try and advise them, and you try and end up with a result that everyone is happy with. But I think whether the industry benefits from the conferences, I think I've been thinking about this a lot, right? Like why do crypto people like conferences so much, or why are there so many crypto conferences? And I think part of that reason is because crypto was so far ahead in terms of work habits. Like people were remote and nomads in crypto like almost from the start, right? And like imagine in 2010, right? How many people were remote or like nomads? Like not that many. Not that many people were doing that. But in crypto, people were already doing, and people were comfortable with being pseudonymous or anonymous, and never you could work with somebody for years and never meet them. And so I think because the crypto workforce is so mobile and so remote, the conferences actually provide a very valuable function for them, which is to actually have some kind of reason to like get together a few times a year. So I suspect that's what really drives a lot of the energy and interest in conferences. And I think as crypto gets older, it's crazy. Like now you have people who like have only ever worked in crypto, and like they've only ever met their colleagues at conferences, like or at offsites at conferences, so it's become its own self-perpetuating thing. And more people opt to be remote, therefore you have more and more interest in conferences because they want to meet the people they work with. So I suspect that's the cycle in terms of why people like conferences so much. And I think why it's unique to crypto, it's because of the remote work and the nomad stuff. Um, and I think that the other factor why it's unique to crypto is, when you're a foundation, you're shepherding a protocol. it's hard to get an excuse to get people together or to deliver a message, right? And so I think that's another reason because there's so many protocols, so many foundations, they have treasuries to deploy. They need to like unite their ecosystem, make them excited about something. They have to deliver a message to them about something. Turns out the best way to do that is a conference. Like, how else could you do it? You could send out Discord messages and emails and like Twitter Spaces, but like that's just not going to work as well as getting a few thousand people together looking at one guy talking on stage. And so I think that's the other reason why this on the supply side, why conferences keep coming up, because it's probably the best way to get that done when you're trying to get this decentralized or distributed community and ecosystem, getting them all pointing the same direction and getting them excited about something. Um, and just a last note, so I was not involved in DevCon. We did a conference just before DevCon for Near Foundation. Although Ethereum Foundation did ask me to organize the first DevCon, DevCon 1 in London, but I had just joined Quartz, so it was not. It was going to be tricky to ask my editor to let me organize a crypto conference while being a tech reporter. So yeah, that's conferences.
Interesting. No, and I think I agree. I think that the added value is being used to seeing everybody either on a screen or in a chat, and to actually be able to physically be able to chat to them and find, like, run into real people with real facial expressions, and like hang out and get drunk and just like have fun and that sort of stuff. I think that's where it's at. But I do think that sometimes I wonder, like, is there an excess of conferences or not, or just like what
Oh,
is it about them that draws so
there's
many
almost certainly
people
too
in?
many conferences. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 no doubt. Um, June, this has been brilliant, and I feel like I want to already invite you back because I want to pick your brain in like the earliest days, like the 2013 to 2015, and just like focus specifically on that. But this has been fantastic and super interesting, and I want to end on the same questions that I always end on, which is, what book are you reading at the moment, and what book are you recommending? I mean, what book are you recommending to people lately, or have you been, yeah, or do you recommend? It can be crypto related. It doesn't necessarily have to be. Anything's fair game.
Yeah, yeah, I'm enthusiastic about this because I recently got back into reading some books. I'm just trying to find the
Cool.
the, the title of this book. It's a book called Drama Drives Interest by Catherine Sands, and it is the unofficial, I think, biography or history of Web Summit, which is a big tech conference that happens in Portugal, which I've attended for many years and have always been interested in this story. Started by three young guys in Ireland, and they had in the early days they had Elon Musk, Bono, Mark Zuckerberg all attending, flying to Dublin to attend this conference. So it's a story about that. It's quite interesting for people interested in the tech conference circuit and or the conference business. Recommended to be by a chap named Ross who works at Coinbase in comms, actually, an Irish gentleman. And then the book I'm recommending to everyone recently is really an incredible work of journalism. It's called Gambling Man. The title is Gambling Man, and it's a biography of Masayoshi Son, the founder of SoftBank, and is written by Lionel Barber, who was the longtime editor of the Financial Times. It's kind of a sweeping biography over, I think Masa is like almost 70 now, right? So last sort of 70 years, and it's kind of a history of like the global technology industry as well, because you realize he was involved in early transistors, chips, the chips business, personal computer. Then he got into telcos. He got into handsets with iPhone. And he got into all these things, and he got into VC and so on. So I think yeah, really really well reported and written story, and done in a way that only someone with that level of experience, covering the markets, covering these trends and geopolitics for so many years, can write in such an authoritative, tight way.
No, brilliant. I've actually got it bookmarked because I've seen you shill it on Twitter and in the ACJR, and it drew my eye to it. So I've got it there, and I'll come back to you once I'm finished with the two on my because I think that one's actually third. I don't know why it made it so quickly so far up my reading list, but I think it's because I don't know anything about it, and it just sounds like something that I'd be interested in. So yeah, no, brilliant recommendation. And Joon, once again, thank you so much for coming on. This has been fantastic, really interesting. And yeah, I'm to everybody listening. I always forget, but this time I'm not forgetting. Subscribe, hit the like button, alarm bells, notifications, put it on your Google Calendar, everything for the next episode. But yeah, thanks heaps for tuning in, and thanks heaps for coming on, Joon.
Thanks so much for having me, Pedro.